Hey guys, karibu tena. Welcome back to my channel. By today's title, I'm going to talk to all of my new graduate nurses out there and try to help you as you're applying for jobs. Maybe you've already applied for a job and you're just wondering what to expect, or maybe you're in the application process and you're trying to navigate that. So that's what this video is here for. I just want to share with you guys some of the things that I learned when I was a new graduate nurse. So I hope you like this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you can see more content like this and be notified when it's out. So with that said, let's get into the gist of the video. So the first thing that you should know as a new graduate is that you're going to have a lot of new hire paperwork. Let's say you're already in the process, you accepted a job, but now you're going through like the new hire paperwork and just trying to read the fine lines. So some things that you should look out for are commitments / contracts. So make sure you read your new hire paperwork very carefully with HR. That way you know if you're committing to a year or contracted to a year to a certain hospital. So being committed just basically means like you're going to stay X amount of months or a year with that hospital system. And a lot of times they will say you have to work so many months with that unit before you can transfer to a different unit within the same hospital system. So just read those very carefully in case you're not sure about the job, or you're not sure if you want to stick in that unit, you may want to transfer. Just make sure you're up to date on what the requirements are for you, because it does make sense for them. There's a lot of time and money that goes into training new graduate nurses, so a lot of times they want a commitment. That way all that time and money doesn't go to waste when the nurse leaves. So just make sure you read that carefully. And then if you're taking on sign-on bonuses, relocation bonuses, things like that, just make sure you know what the commitments are tied to those. And in case you move or something happens, talk to HR about like what the caveats are to that. Like if you move, do you still have to complete this commitment? Do you have to pay money back if you get married? If something happens, things like that. It's just good to ask about them. So just read the paperwork carefully. Another thing that they try to tell new graduate nurses is that you have to work in med-surg before you can work in a critical care setting. And that is not the case. You can absolutely work in a higher acuity setting without having previous experience in like a med-surg or clinic or whatever. Just be ready to put in the work. A lot of times they will choose people who have those backgrounds. If you're a new graduate nurse and you weren't a CNA on the floor or anything like that, they'll take somebody who has had like med-surg background because they have a little more to offer. As a new graduate nurse, you don't have much to offer. But that's where being a CNA can be helpful, because if you feel like you have the time and the resources to be a CNA while you're in nursing school or even pre-nursing school on a specific unit that you'd like to work on, or just in general, that does bring a little bit more value to your resume. And in my case, I worked on an ICU unit, so I was kind of top pick for being on that unit as a new grad, because I worked with nurses, I had rapport with the people who would be my preceptors, I already knew my manager, and it was a very easy transition, not only for me, but the people hiring me and training me. So that's something to consider. But you don't have to be in med-surg beforehand, just keep that in mind. But keep in mind that you have to put in the work and the knowledge and the extra study time to be on a higher acuity setting, because they're gonna wanna see that you're serious and determined. Next thing, don't be afraid to ask questions. I know sometimes it's really hard, sometimes preceptors are not approachable, but if you have a question that your preceptor isn't answering, you can sometimes go to your manager. Nursing educators are in the building for a reason. You can always reach out to a nursing educator in hopes that they'll walk you through something, and that's what they're there for. They're as a resource to nurses to understand policies better, procedures better, and they're going to be educating you as a new grad. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Sometimes it's hard, and don't be afraid to ask it from a different person, because at the end of the day, what was told to me is you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know it, don't try to attempt it without learning about it first. Learn how to protect yourself early on. So when you come off of your orientation, however long it is, there are some cases where there's going to be unsafe staffing settings. So if you are not comfortable with a higher acuity patient or certain situation, you need to speak up right away and tell the charge nurse And if the charge nurse doesn't reassign you, you need to take it up the next level. So learn your chain of command and what levels you need to take it up. So if you feel like you're in an unsafe staffing situation where you either doubled up too many or you have an assignment that you don't feel confident taking, speak up and continue to speak up until they make a change, because that's you saying, hey, I'm acknowledging that I don't have the skills and resources to take this assignment and put this patient in danger and risk my own license, because at the end of the day, it is your own license. So don't be afraid to speak up if you have to. So deviating a little bit from like the staffing, the hiring and stuff, when it comes to your unit in particular as a new grad, ask your preceptor and try to study things that are very specific to your patient population on that floor, because one, that makes you look really good with your preceptor. Two, it makes you look good with the providers because that's what they specialize in usually. And three, you'll know a little bit more. You have to study as you're a new grad still. It doesn't mean you have to study the same way you did in nursing school, but you need to keep up your knowledge and know what you're working with and learn how to specialize. So in my case, we work with post-cardiac surgery patients, and one of the things that I looked into more was if something happened and they developed a complication. Sometimes our most common complications are arrhythmias. So how do we treat each one? If they start to become bradycardic, there's a pacer box in a room. I need to know how to go in, set it up, and hook it up to the patient. So I focused on having my preceptors show me how to hook it up and placing, always, anytime I walked into my room, I always look for that pacer box, always. And the last time I went to work, I went in and I had the pacer box, but not the pacing wires. And if something comes up, you gotta know what your resources are. I watched another nurse's YouTube video who worked in labor delivery, and she deals with nausea all the time. So she looked up and asked other people how to treat nausea. So she never walked into a room without a bucket for the patient to throw up in if they needed to. But she also looked into Zofran and the effects of it and complications from it, and alcohol swabs, putting them on the nose as a sensory distraction to keep patients from throwing up. So just learn some of the basic things that are very specific to your patient population, and that will set you ahead, and you'll learn a lot of cool tips and tricks from your preceptors, I guarantee. Another thing is charting narratives. Sometimes my preceptor didn't always look very in-depth at my charting, and sometimes you'll have to ask them to look at your charting because they may feel confident, but you may not, and you may want them to just review it and give you feedback. So don't be afraid to ask for feedback and constructive criticism, but make sure you are making very good, solid narratives, because this is not something that they really teach us in nursing school. They taught me how to make progress notes, but it's a little bit different from the narrative. So make sure you know how to write a really good, solid narrative, and have some of the, older preceptors, the people who've been around longer, show you, because or a nursing educator you typically knows. A lot of times they have to do chart auditing, and they will catch the narrative flaws and the assessment flaws. So ask them, reach out, and work on your charting, because at the end of the day, it will save your rear end. Another tip is that preceptors are different. You're gonna have more than one preceptor guaranteed. I had one main preceptor, but then she only worked twice a week. So on the third day, I had different preceptors, which I actually loved because I got used to one and we worked really well together. But then I got to see a lot of other different ways that people did things. So it's gonna be hard to switch back and forth, but whoever is your preceptor, do what they're showing you to do. I know that can be hard. I know that there might be a better way to do it or an easier way to do it or a way that you learn how to do it, but learn their way of doing it, because you never know when it will come in handy. And a lot of times it just produces a little bit more rapport between you and your preceptor, and it makes them not think that you're being defensive. Okay, so my phone ran out of storage and I'm back filming. So this is a couple days later on my day off, so I just wanted to finish talking about this. So getting right back into it. The next thing that you want to do is checklists. So this is something that I've talked about in my previous videos, but I wanted to learn the routine of the unit for both daytime and nighttime, because I had preceptors on both and worked both shifts. And so I basically ran through with my preceptor. I'm like, okay, what's the general gist of the routine of nights? So like my checklist, for example, involved, going in, getting a report, doing an assessment, charting that assessment. By the time I was done charting it, I'd do meds, And then after med pass, it would be a bed bath right before bed, potentially walking the patient, getting them back into bed. Around that time would be close to like the second assessment. So I would just go ahead and get that done before sitting and charting. And then for the next hour or two, it was a lot of charting. This is for nighttime specifically. So then I would chart my second assessment, my task list, the plan of care for the patient, and so on and so forth. Make yourself a checklist, because a lot of times your preceptor is going to come up. They might leave you alone for a little bit and be like, okay, start doing your thing, come find me when you have a question. And so it's nice to have that checklist, because sometimes your preceptor will come over and be like, okay, what's been done? And I found that even when I had everything caught up, instead of saying, great job, like, oh, you've done a lot of times my preceptors would be like, okay, cool, yeah, but here's the next 5 things to do. When I had the checklist sitting out in front of me, it was a little bit more impressive to them, and they were like, okay, yeah, I see you've done a lot, and you're still going down the list. So they were less likely to come in and be like, hey, it's time to do this, it's time to do that, which wasn't bad. I liked the reminders, but some people may have a little bit of a hard time with that. So make yourself a checklist. It's good for you, and it's good for your preceptor to kind of visualize, oh, okay, this is where they're at, this is how they're doing with their time management. It's just really helpful. Before you start work somewhere, make sure when you're doing the hiring process that if you have any upcoming events that you really need to go to, like a wedding or a baby shower, or like a funeral or something like that, any of those big important dates, a graduation, then make sure you tell your nurse manager up front, instead of getting hired and then like a week later being like, oh yeah, I need a day off. It's just helpful. It helps them understand what they need to do for you. Make sure you can get time off. Sometimes you're not going to have earned time off yet. So it gives them enough time to plan your schedule around those dates and potentially put you on a different date or swap a shift with a different employee. So it's just helpful to them, helpful to you, because a lot of nursing schedules are like a month in advance, or they're made in a month in advance because they have to be. So just make sure you're upfront with any events that are coming up, and try not to just figure them all out on your own. Because most of the time you don't know your work environment yet, or who's going to be willing to switch, or if anybody's going to want to switch. So anyways, just a pro tip there. Okay, I have 2 tips left. The second to last is to make sure that if you are not vibing with your preceptor, talk to your nurse manager. They're the first one you should go to. And a lot of times they've placed you with a preceptor for a reason. Maybe you're not the best at time management, so they've given you a stricter preceptor who's like, okay, chop chop, let's get this done, on purpose to try to help improve that. It doesn't mean that they're sending you somebody to micromanage you. It means that they're trying to, they've seen some of your weaknesses, and so they don't want a preceptor who's going to hone on your strengths, because those are your strengths. They're going to hone in on your weaknesses and be like, hey, let's implement some things to hone in on this. But obviously there's chances for you not to vibe with your preceptor, and vice versa. Some preceptors aren't very nice or kind. Some people micromanage, some people don't answer your questions. So just take it to your nurse manager, and sometimes they'll be able to swap you with a nurse preceptor. All right, last tip for you guys is to avoid burnout. And I'm gonna make a whole video on ways to avoid burnout, but it is really easy to get burnout and give your all and 100% right up front, and then find that you're overwhelmed if everything's new. And so just take everything as you can. When you're being precepted, you have your own license, but this is the time to ask a lot of questions and fall back on your preceptor for certain things if you're not comfortable with it, of course. But to learn how to balance your work and life routine, the biggest thing I can say is to try not to take work home with you. I think it is helpful, like maybe when you initially get home and like eat dinner with a spouse or your parents or somebody you trust or roommate, maybe explaining briefly like, hey, my work day went great or it went bad. That's a helpful way to cope. But when you bring work home with you and you're like, oh, did I do this right? Did I do that right? Did I mess up? That is stuff you can maybe write down briefly and then take back with you to your preceptor and have them evaluate you at work. Don't bring it home, because then you're never going to get the peace and the rest and recovery that you need to go back to work and then fix the problem, if that makes sense. That was something I really struggled with. I still bring work home with me some days, but as I've worked longer, I've learned to leave work at work and like, you know what, if I miss this in report, if I, forgot to do something on my task list, then I will fix it when I go back to work, and I will make sure that I work on improving it when I'm back in that environment. But at home, I'm gonna rest and I'm gonna recharge, because if I don't, I'm not taking my best self back to work with me. So that's just something that you may not have an easy time doing right off the bat, but it's something to prioritize and work really hard at doing. And that's all for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If you're a new grad, drop a comment below and let me know what unit you're working on, if these tips were helpful, or if there's any other questions that I can answer for you guys. So thanks for watching. I wish you the best of luck at your new job. If you are a new grad and if you just graduated, I wish you the best of luck if you're working on NCLEX. And just don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. That way I can keep making this content for you guys. So love you all. Tutunana, which means see you later. And I will certainly see you later in the next video. Bye, guys.